Riverside Commons was still that Tuesday morning, the kind of still that makes you believe the world has finally agreed to leave you alone. The Mallards had learned his schedule better than most people know their own children's birthdays. They came to the water's edge when they heard his footsteps on the gravel path. They trusted him. Officer Miguel Agee stepped out of his cruiser and saw none of that. He saw a black man. He saw a brown paper bag. He saw an opportunity. He saw, in the language his training had never corrected, a problem to be solved. He put his hand on his gun before he even crossed the grass. He didn't know that the man crouching by the water had spent 35 years on the other side of that exact gesture. He didn't know he was walking toward a legend. He didn't know that by the time his shift was over, he would no longer have a shift. And he had absolutely no idea that what came next would be recorded on his own bodycam and watched by 11 million people before the week was out. This is the story of what happens when arrogance mistakes dignity for weakness. It doesn't end well for arrogance. The October light over Riverside Commons came in low and amber that morning, filtered through a canopy of oak trees so old their roots had cracked the path in a dozen places. The park sat at the western edge of Caldwell, the city's quiet exhale, a long green stretch of grass and water that the neighborhood used for walking dogs, pushing strollers, and forgetting briefly that the rest of the world existed. Stephen Howell had been coming here every Tuesday for 2 years. He arrived at 8:47 a.m., always 8:47, a man whose internal clock had been calibrated by 3.5 decades of shift rotations, court appearances, and pre-dawn briefings. He wore a gray wool blazer over a white button-down, knife-pressed slacks, and shoes that caught the morning light when he walked. Not because he was trying to impress anyone, because that was simply how Stephen Howell got dressed. Some habits, once built, don't ask permission to stay. At 71, he moved with the deliberate ease of a man who had stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. His shoulders were still broad, wide as a doorframe, though the years had rounded their edges just slightly, the way old oak beams soften without losing their strength. His hair was silver, cropped close, his mustache neatly trimmed. His hands, resting now on his knees as he settled onto the bench near the water's edge, were large and steady. Hands that had, over the course of a long career, pinned medals on chests, pressed against wounds, turned evidence bags inside out under fluorescent lights, and signed the paperwork that sent more than 40 officers to prison for the very thing they would swear they'd never do. Those same hands now opened a brown paper bag and reached inside. "There you go," he said quietly. His voice was low, unhurried, the kind of voice that had once made a room of 200 officers go silent without him raising it. "Don't crowd each other. There's plenty." The Mallards came without hesitation. 3 of them, then 5, then 7, waddling forward with the supreme confidence of creatures who had never once been lied to. He scattered the grain in a wide arc. A drake with an ink-green head, the one he'd privately named General, pushed to the front of the group as he always did. Howell watched him with something close to amusement. "Every time," he murmured. "35 years I dealt with guys like you." For a long moment, there was nothing in the world but the sound of water, feathers, and grain hitting the grass. Howell breathed in slowly. The cold air tasted clean. He had spent the last 35 years of his professional life inside the machinery of American law enforcement. All its weight, its contradictions, its capacity for both salvation and ruin, and he had emerged from it still believing, just barely, that it could be something better than it was. Retirement had not killed that belief. It had just given him enough distance to hold it more honestly. He didn't hear the car door. He heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, the crunch of boot treads on gravel that communicated, with remarkable clarity, that whoever was approaching wanted to be heard. Howell didn't look up immediately. He reached into the bag again, unhurried, and cast another handful of grain across the grass. He had smelled the approach before he heard it, synthetic fabric, gun oil, and the particular tension that young men in authority carry in their bodies like a held breath. "Sir." The voice was tight, 20-something, loaded with something that had not yet been earned. Howell turned his head. Officer Miguel Agee stood 8 feet away, feet planted slightly too wide. A stance someone had taught him and he had never learned to wear naturally. He was compact, thick through the chest, with a fade cut grown out a week past its prime. His uniform was immaculate. His tactical vest carried more equipment than the situation had any use for: 2 spare magazines, a baton, a taser, a radio clipped high on his chest. His right hand rested at his hip, not gripping the holster, but close. Always close. His eyes moved over Stephen Howell the way eyes move over a problem they've already decided to solve. "Afternoon, officer," Howell said, his voice easy. "Something I can help you with?" "We've had reports," Agee said. "Suspicious activity in this area. Loitering. Possible narcotics." His gaze dropped briefly to the paper bag, then back up. "What's in the bag?" Howell looked at the bag, then at the ducks, then patiently at Agee. "Grain," he said. "Cracked corn, mostly. Some millet." He paused. "They prefer it to bread. Bread's not good for them." Agee didn't blink. "I need you to stand up and provide identification." Howell set the bag on the bench beside him. He moved without hurry, reading the young officer the way he had spent a career reading people, cataloging the weight distribution, the tightness around the jaw, the proximity of the hand to the weapon. Agee's stance was all forward pressure, no patience. A man who had decided before he crossed the grass what the outcome of this interaction was going to be. "Officer," Howell said, keeping his voice at the same steady register. "My name is Stephen Howell. I live on Carlisle Avenue, for blocks east of here. I am a retired civil servant. I have been coming to this park every Tuesday for 2 years. He nodded toward the ducks. "These are my witnesses." "Identification," Agee said again. Flatter this time. Less questions, more instruction. Howell looked at him for a moment. Then he said calmly, "I'm going to reach for my wallet. It's in my left breast pocket. I want you to see exactly what I'm doing before I do it. Don't reach for anything," Agee snapped, and his hand moved, not to the taser, but past it, to the grip of his firearm. "Hands where I can see them. Now." Howell went completely still, not from fear. From the cold, practiced calm of a man who had trained hundreds of officers on exactly what not to do in exactly this situation. He looked at Agee's hand on his weapon. He looked at Agee's eyes. He saw in them something he recognized. Not malice, exactly, but something younger and more reckless than malice. Certainty without knowledge. Authority without wisdom. A boy wearing a uniform and mistaking the weight of it for power he hadn't built. Howell's hands came up slowly, steady as stone. "Son," he said, his voice dropping to a register he hadn't used in 2 years, the one that had once cleared holding rooms and quieted riots. "You are making a very serious mistake." "Turn around," Agee said. "Hands behind your back." The general honked once and waddled toward the water. The rest of the ducks followed. Howell watched them go. Then he turned around. Agee drove the way young officers who want to feel powerful drive when they have someone in the back seat. Sharp brakes, no announcements, the partition grimy enough to let you know the passenger wasn't meant to be comfortable. Howell sat with his wrists cuffed at the small of his back. Too tight. He noted the spacing, the bite of metal against bone, and watched Caldwell move past the scratched window. He had arrested men in this city. He had trained the people who trained the people who trained the officer now sitting in the front seat. He did not say this. He watched the city and he remembered it, and he let the fire that was building somewhere behind his sternum burn quietly, because men who have been chief know how to let things burn without letting them consume. He counted the procedural violations. It helped him focus. No miranda advisement. Excessive cuff tension. No articulatid probable cause. Pretextual stop documented on bodycam. Drawn weapon without legal threshold. 5 and they hadn't reached the station yet. The Caldwell precinct lobby was climate-controlled and nearly empty. It smelled of fresh coffee and floor wax. The desk sergeant, a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s with the tired eyes of someone 20 years past her patience for nonsense, was working through paperwork with the focused energy of a person who had learned to enjoy the quiet parts of the job. She looked up when AG came through the door with his hand on Howell's arm. Got a loitering collar, AG announced. Refused ID. Possible narcotics. Running him for priors. The sergeant set down her pen. Name. Wouldn't give it. I'll give it, Howell said. He straightened his posture, all 6 feet and 2 inches of it, and looked at the sergeant directly. Stephen Howell, retired chief of police, Caldwell Metro, badge number 0001. I served this department for 35 years. I believe the current chief of operations, Patricia Dunmore, was a patrol officer under my watch in 2003. The lobby went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something irreversible has just been said. The desk sergeant stared at him. Then she stood up slowly, the way a person stands up when their body is reacting before their mind has caught up. Chief Howell, she said. The word came out like a door opening. That's correct, Sergeant. His eyes moved to AG, who had gone very still. I believe my wrists require attention. The cuffs were applied incorrectly. What happened next? The keys, the unlocking, the color leaving AG's face, the phone call to Dunmore's office, the way voices carried through the precinct hallways until a door opened at the far end of the corridor and a woman walked through it with the expression of someone who has just been told the building is on fire. All of it was still running on AG's bodycam. Every word, every second, every procedural violation preserved in 1080p. The office meeting lasted 14 minutes. Howell spoke for 11 of them. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He laid out what had occurred the way he had once laid out evidence at internal review hearings, in sequence with precision, without embellishment, and without any apparent interest in whether the man across from him found it comfortable to hear. He saw a black man on a bench, Howell said, and he made a decision before he reached me. Everything that followed was a justification of a conclusion he'd already drawn. That is a training failure. That is a supervision failure. And it is, most importantly, a choice that Officer AG made. Chief Dunmore looked at AG. AG looked at the floor. Badge and weapon, Dunmore said. You're on administrative leave effective now. Full internal review. AG reached for his badge with hands that weren't entirely steady. He placed it on the desk. He placed the weapon beside it. He looked at Howell once. A look that lasted less than 2 seconds, but that Howell had seen before many times in many faces across a long career. It was not the look of a man who had learned something. It was the look of a man keeping score. At the door, AG paused. Sir, he said, and the word came out wrong, clipped and hard at its edges. Enjoy your retirement. Howell watched him go. Then he looked at Dunmore. Patricia, he said, that young man is not finished. I want you to understand that clearly. She nodded. But the precinct was quiet and orderly, and it was easy in a quiet and orderly place to believe that a slammed door was just a door slamming. Howell walked out into the October air. The bodycam footage was locked in the department's evidence system. His granddaughter Denise was going to get it out. He was already composing the voicemail in his head. Across the parking lot, a patrol car sat idling, badge number 4451 visible on its side panel. Howell did not look at it directly, but he felt it the way you feel weather coming. He had been right about men like AG before. He had, in fact, written the training literature on the subject. He was not wrong now. The ducks were still at the pond when he drove past Riverside Commons on his way home. The general was holding court at the water's edge, unbothered and sovereign. Howell made a mental note to bring extra grain next Tuesday. He had a feeling he was going to need peace. Stephen Howell had earned the right to do nothing, and he was still learning how. 35 years. 3 medals of valor. 1 department rebuilt from the inside out after a corruption scandal that had gutted it down to the studs. He had given Caldwell Metro the best decades of his life. The sharp ones, the ones that don't come back. And when they handed him the retirement plaque at the ceremony in the main hall, he had shaken every hand in the room and driven home in silence and sat in his kitchen for a long time without turning on a light. That was 2 years ago. He was still adjusting. His wife Carol had died 14 months before his retirement, pancreatic cancer, quick and merciless the way the worst things tend to be. The house on Carlisle Avenue was the right size for 2 people and too large for 1. He had kept her reading chair by the window. He had not moved it. Some things you leave exactly where they are. What he had found, in the absence of everything the job had once structured his days around, was the pond at Riverside Commons. The ducks didn't need managing. They didn't file complaints or require supervision or look to him to make decisions that kept people alive. They just came when he came, and ate what he brought, and went about their business with the sublime indifference of creatures unbothered by legacy. He found that deeply restoring. His granddaughter Denise called every morning at 8, without fail. She was 34, a civil rights attorney in Atlanta, and she worried about him the way competent people worry, quietly, specifically, and with follow-up questions. "How are the ducks?" she'd ask. "Fine company," he'd tell her. She'd pause the way she always paused. "That's not what I asked, Grandpa." He'd smile into the phone and say nothing, because some answers you carry yourself. The call came in at 8:52 a.m. Suspicious person, Riverside Commons, anonymous tip. No description beyond older male, acting erratically near the pond. That was it. That was everything Miguel Agee needed. He had been on the force for 2 years and 3 months, and he had not yet learned the difference between a call that required urgency and one that required judgment. He treated them the same. It was, in a way, the whole problem. He pulled the cruiser along the Park Service Road and spotted the figure immediately. A large black man on the bench nearest the water, gray blazer, paper bag in hand, ducks at his feet. Agee sat in the car for 4 seconds, engine idling. Then he got out. He crossed the grass with his shoulders squared and his chin forward, the way a man walks when he has already written the ending. The ducks heard him coming and shifted uneasily. Howell didn't move. The conversation that followed, every word of it, was captured on the bodycam clipped to Agee's vest. Agee would later claim he hadn't realized it was recording. The department's review board would note, with considerable restraint, that it always recorded. When Howell stated his name, his address, his 35 years of service, and calmly suggested that Agee run his credentials before this went any further, Agee's hand moved to his weapon. Not the taser, the firearm. The red dot of the laser sight settled on Howell's chest like a period at the end of a sentence Agee had decided to finish. Howell looked at the dot, then at Agee's eyes. His hands came up slowly, and his face did not change. Not a flinch, not a tremor, nothing. The bodycam blinked its small red light. It recorded everything. The duty sergeant's name was Carla Maines, and she had processed 14 years of bookings without once going pale. She went pale now. She read the name on the screen. She read it again. Then she looked up at the man standing at her counter, the broad shoulders, the pressed blazer, the wrists bearing the red indentations of cuffs applied too tightly, and something behind her eyes shifted in the way things shift when two facts collide that should never have been in the same room together. She picked up the phone before she said a word. Captain Lorraine Voss took the call in her office, listened for 11 seconds, and was already dialing the mayor's personal line before Maines finished the sentence. The mayor, to his credit, said only 4 words before hanging up. "Fix it. Right now." What happened next moved through the precinct the way current moves through water. Fast, invisible, and impossible to stop once it started. Doors opened. Voices dropped. Officers appeared in the hallway outside the booking area. Some in uniform, some in plainclothes, drawn by the specific gravity of a name that meant something in this building. Sergeant Dwayne Okafor, 22 years on the force, had been Howell's patrol officer in 2007. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and looked at AG with an expression that required no translation. AG stood in the center of the room and felt the walls move. Inside Voss's office, the dressing down lasted 19 minutes. Voss did not shout. Shouting would have been easier to survive. She was precise and quiet and methodical, and she laid out every violation the way a surgeon lays out instruments. One at a time, each one worse than the last. AG looked around the room at the faces watching through the glass. He recognized none of them. They all clearly recognized him. He understood finally and far too late the specific weight of what he had done. Suspension, AG discovered, did not mean silence. It meant more time. He worked his phone from his apartment with the focused energy of a man who had decided that losing was something that happened to other people. He texted officers he trusted, and a few he'd merely compromised, with the kind of careful language that couldn't be screenshotted into anything actionable. "You didn't see what I saw out there." Guy was agitated. "The footage doesn't show the whole thing. There's context missing." He used the word context the way people use it when they mean ignore what you actually witnessed. Some officers deleted the messages. A few didn't. Officer Dominic Reyes didn't. Reyes was 29, 3 years on the force, and owed AG a favor he had never properly examined the cost of. He began filing noise complaints against the house on Carlisle Avenue, twice in 1 week. Then a welfare check, anonymous, that sent a patrol car to Howell's door at 11 on a Wednesday night. Petty work. The kind designed not to injure but to remind, "We know where you live and we have time." Then the tires. Then a cracked side window on the garage. A rock wrapped in silence. No witnesses. Howell documented everything. He had a journal, black cover, unlined pages, and he wrote in it each morning with the same careful precision he had once used for incident reports. Date, time, description, evidence photographed and filed. He had been a thorough man his entire career. He was thorough now. What he did not write, but carried regardless, was the particular grief of recognition. He had sat across from men like AG before, not as the target, but as the chief reviewing the file, approving the settlement, shaking the victim's hand and saying words that were true but insufficient. He had believed, then, that his reforms had mattered. He believed it still. But belief, he was relearning, was not the same as protection. He wrote the date. He wrote what they had done to his tires. He closed the journal and made coffee and watched the Carlisle Avenue streetlight through the kitchen window until the sky began to lighten. Then he called Denise. Denise Howell drove from the airport with her litigation briefcase on the passenger seat and the bodycam footage loaded on her laptop in the back. She had filed the FOIA request from her Atlanta office 48 hours after her grandfather's first phone call, before he had finished explaining what happened, because she had grown up watching him give institutions the benefit of the doubt, and she had long ago decided she would not make the same courtesy her default position. She found him in the kitchen, coffee going cold beside the journal, and she knew before he stood to hug her that something was different. She had seen her grandfather angry, controlled architectural anger, the kind that built things rather than broke them. She had seen him tired. She had seen him grieve her grandmother with a quietness that had nearly undone her. This was quieter than any of that. It frightened her in a way anger never would have. "How long has it been going on?" she asked, meaning the harassment. 11 days, he said, meaning he had been counting. She opened the laptop. They watched the footage together at the kitchen table. The park, the approach, the hand moving to the weapon, her grandfather's hands rising with that terrible, patient steadiness. She watched his face while he watched it. He looked like a man reviewing someone else's file. She called Marcus Webb at the Caldwell Courier at 9 the next morning. Webb was 61, old school, and had covered the department for 20 years. He watched the footage once, then again, and then said nothing for a moment that lasted long enough to mean something. The story ran the following afternoon. By midnight, it had crossed 4 million views. By morning, the city council had scheduled an emergency session. "AG, someone texted Reyes, has a problem." Reyes didn't respond. He was already calculating the distance between a favor and a liability, and finding it shorter than he'd expected. City Hall held 300 seats. By 6 o'clock, people were standing along the back wall and spilling into the corridor, and the overflow crowd had gathered on the steps outside with phones raised, watching the live stream. Caldwell had not seen a hearing like this in 20 years. Some of the officers present remembered the last one. Howell had chaired it. Denise stood at the podium in a charcoal blazer and presented the bodycam footage on the council chamber's main screen with the methodical calm of someone who had spent a decade turning injustice into evidence. She advanced it frame by frame at the critical moment. AG's hand moving past the taser, settling on the firearm, the laser dot appearing on her grandfather's chest. She let each frame sit long enough to be understood. She did not editorialize. She didn't need to. Lieutenant Marcus Cole, retired, testified for 8 minutes about the man who had promoted him in 2004. Lieutenant Sandra Briggs, who had served under Howell during the department's restructuring, spoke about what his leadership had cost him personally and what it had given the city. 2 community organizers testified about the harassment campaign. Dominic Reyes, sitting behind his attorney, said nothing, but his presence alone confirmed what Denise had already documented. Captain Lorraine Voss took the stand near the end of the evening. She was asked directly whether the department had acted appropriately in the days following AG's suspension. She paused for a moment that the room felt in its bones. Then she said no. She said it clearly and without qualification, and the chamber absorbed the word in silence. AG sat in the last row in civilian clothes and watched his version of events dismantle itself piece by piece. He had come, perhaps, believing that presence was a form of resistance. The council voted at 10:47 p.m. Termination, effective immediately, unanimously. AG walked out before they finished reading the resolution. Nobody moved to stop him. Nobody needed to. Without the badge, AG came apart in the specific way that men come apart when the uniform has been doing the work that the character was supposed to do. He stopped returning calls. He stopped sleeping regular hours. He sat in his apartment with the curtains drawn and refreshed news articles about the hearing until the refresh became a ritual and the ritual became an obsession and the obsession became something darker and less disciplined than either. The message surfaced 11 days after the termination. A former colleague, an officer named Darren Finch who had been tangentially friendly with AG and deeply regretted it, brought a screenshot to Captain Voss without being asked. The message was detailed in ways that mattered legally. It named Howell by name. It named the address on Carlisle Avenue. It contained language that a reasonable person would interpret as a threat, and Finch was a reasonable person, which was why he'd screenshotted at 2 in the morning and hadn't slept since. Denise had the DA's office on the phone by 9. By noon, a threat assessment had been initiated. By 3, She was sitting across from her grandfather at the kitchen table explaining what the message said, watching his face for the fear she expected to find there. She didn't find it. He listened. He nodded once. He asked 2 clarifying questions, the timestamp on the message, and whether Finch had been interviewed. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the street for a moment. "I want you at the Morrisons tonight," he said. The Morrisons were 3 doors down. Carol had trusted them. That was enough. "Grandpa! Denise!" His voice was quiet and absolute. "Please." She left at 7, briefcase in hand, looking back at the house twice. Howell locked the door, turned off the porch light, and sat in the chair facing the hallway. The chair Carol used to read in. He had not moved it in 2 years. He moved it now, angling it slightly, sightlines clear in both directions. Then he settled into it, folded his hands, and waited. 35 years had taught him many things. One of them was this: the waiting was never the hard part. The trial lasted 9 days. It felt to everyone present like something longer, like a reckoning that had been building not just for the months since Riverside Commons, but for the full 2 years AG had worn the badge, and perhaps longer than that. Denise was not the lead prosecutor. She had been too close to the case for that, but she sat behind the railing every day, and the prosecution knew where to look when they needed to understand what something meant. The bodycam footage was entered on day 2. The jury watched it in silence. One juror, a woman in the 3rd seat, looked away at the moment the laser dot appeared on Howell's chest and did not look back until it was over. The courtroom had the quality of a room in which people are trying very hard to breathe normally. The threatening messages were entered on day 4. AG's defense argued context. The prosecution read them aloud without comment. Context, it turned out, did not help. Dominic Reyes testified on day 6, pursuant to his plea agreement, in a flat and careful voice that carried the particular exhaustion of a man who had traded one reckoning for a smaller one. He confirmed the nuisance complaints, the harassment coordination, the calls with AG in the weeks following the suspension. He did not look at AG while he spoke. AG stared at him anyway. Captain Voss took the stand on day 7 and testified with the precision of someone who had spent considerable time making peace with what she was about to say. She said it completely. The defense called 2 character witnesses. Neither helped. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 12 minutes. 18 years. No parole eligibility for 12. The courtroom received the verdict in near silence, the way people receive things they knew were coming but needed to hear said aloud regardless. Howell sat in the 2nd row and listened to the number and nodded once, almost imperceptibly, the way a man nods when the world has confirmed something he already knew but had refused to assume. 2 years to the Tuesday. The ribbon was gold, which Howell thought was a bit much. But Denise had organized the ceremony, and he had learned decades ago which battles were worth having with her. He stood in front of the building on Meridian Street, converted from a disused community center, renovated over 14 months with settlement funds and 2 substantial private donations, and held one end of the ribbon while the mayor held the other and said things into a microphone that were true enough to let pass. When the scissors came, Howell cut cleanly. The small crowd applauded. He nodded. Inside, the entrance hall was bright and wide and smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. They had named it the Commons, and beneath the name on the wall, a small plaque read, Riverside Commons Park, Caldwell, where this began. No further explanation. Anyone who needed one could find the footage, which was not difficult. The State Law Enforcement Training Board had made it required viewing 8 months prior, preceded by a 40-minute curriculum on de-escalation and implicit bias that Howell had helped design and quietly insisted bear no one's name, including his. On the far wall of the main hall hung a single photograph, printed large. A man in a gray blazer standing at the edge of a pond, hands raised, chin level, eyes clear, completely unafraid. Denise had chosen it. He had not argued. Miguel Agee was in the 4th year of his sentence at a correctional facility 2 hours north of Caldwell. Howell did not think about him often. When he did, it was without satisfaction and without bitterness, the way you think about weather that has passed. The following Tuesday, he was back at Riverside Commons at 8:47 a.m. with a brown paper bag and no particular agenda. The general was waiting at the water's edge, unbothered and sovereign, as he always was. Howell reached into the bag. "There you go," he said. "There's enough for everyone." That is the kind of ending that stays with you. Stephen Howell walked into that park with a bag of duck feed and walked out of that chapter of his life with something far more powerful. Proof that dignity, patience, and preparation will outlast arrogance every single time. Agee had every advantage that Tuesday morning. The badge, the gun, the uniform, the presumption. And he burned through all of it in under 60 seconds because he looked at a legend and saw a target. That mistake cost him 18 years of his life. And the body cam he forgot was recording? That became required viewing in police academies across the entire state. He handed Howell the weapon that changed law enforcement training. Let that sink in. I want to hear from you in the comments right now. Do you think 18 years was justice served? Or should it have been more? And what about the Riverside Commons Youth Police Academy? Stroke of genius? Or the most elegant act of defiance you've ever seen? Drop your thoughts below because this community brings the best perspective every single week and I read every comment. If the story moved you, hit that like button. It takes 1 second and it helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here, because we bring you real stories of justice, resilience, and the kind of karma that reminds you the universe is still keeping score. And share this video with somebody today who needs to be reminded that standing your ground with grace is the most powerful thing a person can do. Stephen Howell went back to his ducks. The general was waiting. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay dignified, and never mistake someone's peace for weakness.